Hello and welcome to episode 18 of the Give Me a Crown Knitting, Spinning and Bits and Pieces podcast. Welcome back to returning viewers and a big hello to any new viewers out there. Thank you for taking a bit of your week to listen to some of the crafting that I've been working on this week. My name's Nina, also known as Give Me a Crown on Ravelry, Instagram and Pinterest, and it's also the name of my Etsy shop, where I sell project bags, zipper pouches and knitting needle pouches. It's been a pretty busy week for me, and I've got a finished object and some works in progress to show you, and then also a bit of chatter at the end about some of the things that I've got coming up. So it's time to get on with it. My finished object this week are my Arctic texture socks. So apologies if you can hear some noises from outside. I think the garbage trucks have just turned up. But these are my Arctic texture socks, which is a paid pattern on Ravelry from Linda Pomeranke. It's $1 Australian, so it's a little bit less than that if you're in the US. It's about 75 cents or so. These socks are knit from the toe up, and they have a pretty lace pattern along the foot and then all around on the ankle. I've knit these shorter than what most people would because I was using up a 50-gram ball of this grey regia, and then I chose to do the contrast toes, heels and cuffs just so that I could make sure that there was at least some amount of a leg on the sock. I did modify the pattern a little bit for the heel, just so that I could do the contrast. That's not included in the pattern, but if you've knit a few socks before, I think you'll be able to figure it out. And I think they've turned out really nice. These are going to be a gift for my sister-in-law, and they've been washed and blocked, I hang them up to dry on these sock blockers, and that's what I consider to be blocking, and they're ready to be sent off. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll know that I was getting a little bit worried about running out of yarn with the grey. I had weighed it after I finished the first sock, but I realised that I hadn't actually weighed the yarn at the start of the project, so I wasn't entirely sure if I had snuck some yarn out when I got started. So thankfully it all worked out, and I have 2 socks. So there's a few notes in my project page on Ravelry, but I haven't taken the final photograph yet to finish up the project, but you can find it there if you go and take a look. My works in progress, the first one I'll show is my sock yarn blanket, which is growing nicely. So I've added 3 squares to my blanket this week, and one of them is this orange one, which was a mini that was sent to me in a swap by Sandra from the Craftfulness podcast, and I believe it's a Hedgehog Fibres yarn. Another one that I added was this purpley black one, and this is the Madeline Tosh that I spoke about a few weeks ago, that I bought a unicorn tail when I was out in Rylstone at the convent and chapel wool shop, and I spoke about how I had gotten a bit worried about the fact that it was such a deep purple, and people have had problems with Madeline Tosh bleeding when they've washed their finished items. So I gave it a wash. I think it was 5 washes in the end, and a citric acid bath in order to stop the bleeding. And while that was a bit of a pain, I have to say it was amazing to work with. It was so nice and squishy and soft, and it's a single ply yarn, and as much as I didn't enjoy the fact that I had to wash it, I am keen to buy some Madeline-Tosh, and I'd probably just stick to the lighter colours when I do buy it one day. And my third square is this stripy one. So this uses the two Regia yarns that I used in the Arctic texture socks, and I got the idea of doing a striped square from listening to the Tiny Paper Foxes podcast, where Jenny sort of mentioned that she might do a striped square, so I thought I'd give it a go, and I think it's turned out really, really nicely. So that I was originally going to just do a sort of start with the grey and then do the blue, but I prefer the fact that it's striped. I think it looks good. And this is how much of the grey I've got left after that. It's probably about a metre, so I managed to make the most out of that Regia yarn. For those who don't know, I'm knitting this blanket on 2.25mm needles, which I think is a US 1, and I've written up some information about how I knit it on my blog, which is laykitty.com or laykitty.com in English, but I'll put it there. And it's also linked from the Ravelry group. I cast on 26 stitches per side, and I use the memory blanket pattern by Georgie Hallam. But it's going well, and I've got five more minis from Sandra to add in, which I'm going to add along the edge so that all her squares will be put in the sort of same vicinity. But it's growing, it's getting bigger, and I'm really happy with it. And I'm really happy that it's got so many squares from other people in it now. I have not made any progress on my Craftfulness socks because I've been waiting to figure out whether or not I need to pop out of town again, and they're perfect for knitting on the train and the coach, so I have a feeling I'll be popping out of town this week, and I'll keep working on them then. But I have cast on my new project, which I spoke about last week, and it's the Geisler cardigan by Subi Simila, who is a Finnish knitwear designer. It's a paid for pattern on Ravelry, and she's currently doing an Advent promotion, so for the first 24 days of December, I believe, she is each day choosing a different pattern of hers to provide at a discount. So if you follow her on Instagram, you'll see which one she's got promoted, and I think she also has a discount code if you buy 5 patterns of hers at one time, but you'll find all those details on Ravelry if you take a look at her patterns. So I am knitting this project out of Bendigo Woolen Mills 4-ply. I have this luxury slate colourway, and then also the cream colourway, and I did my swatch last week, and I then had a look at the pattern and did some maths, and even though the medium size sounds like it's going to be too large for me, when I take into consideration the fact that I'm getting a few more stitches per 4 inches, I think that the medium is going to sort of get me halfway between a small and a medium, which should work well for me, but I'll keep doing some measurements as I go. And this is how it's looking. So it has a tall collar in a garterish stripe. So this is the outside, and it has buttons, so you can see the buttonholes there, perhaps that side, and that can button up or be open. And I'm just working on I've just finished the short rows for the back of the neck, and there's some raglan increases for the shoulders or the arms. So I think I cast this on Friday, and I've been a bit obsessed with it since then. I've really enjoyed watching the stripes come together. Now I have the task of doing a lot of purling, because I'm going to be doing the body in stockinette and it's a cardigan. So we'll see how long my absolute enthusiasm for it as a project goes. I think I'll probably be casting on a few other things just to give me a break from all the purling. But I used to not enjoy purling, but I have been learning to enjoy it, I guess. Just by doing more and more of it, it becomes less of a chore and more just everyday knitting. What else? I don't really read patterns too far ahead when I work on them. What I did was I just checked some of the stitch counts for the bust and the waist and the hips, just to check whether or not doing the medium size would work for me, and that's about all that I read ahead. I'm not too frightened or anything of garments, so I'm not too concerned about what's going to be popping up, and it's a fairly straightforward pattern anyway. There was one of the increases in the pattern that I wasn't entirely clear on. It sort of describes how to do it, but I found that the description wasn't completely clear, and when I googled that type of increase, I found a few different ways to do it. I'm not sure I'm doing it correctly, but it sort of seems to look okay. So I guess if you're ever working on a pattern and something isn't very clear, just Google. There's always lots of people who will have already answered the question for you, but there are many ways to do a lot of knitting stitches, so try it, put a lifeline in if you need to, and then you can rip back if all goes pear-shaped, but I didn't even bother with that. I was knitting wildly and just waiting to see what happened. It also doesn't mention how to switch the yarns, but I've done a fair bit of work with stripes, so I did it the way that I wanted to, and I think it's looking pretty. One thing that I did do is I'm trying not to use too much paper just in my everyday life, and so I'm using the PDF Expert program that I mentioned last week or the week before to keep track of the pattern. Using that, I've highlighted the stitch counts and that apply to the size that I'm doing, and I've written a few notes in there for myself, but I have printed out a row counter. So what I did was I created an Excel spreadsheet which has got the numbers, 50 numbers per column, and then a space for me to write some notes. So for instance, excuse my horrible handwriting, but I put right side, wrong side just as a general note, and then main colour, contrast colour, and I've just written that down so I can keep track, and then I cross off the number as I complete that row. I've also been putting information in there about when to do the buttonholes and the raglan increases. So this kind of chart just means that I can keep track of what row number I'm on without having to use a counter, because I don't have a counter at this stage, and I can also just jot down any notes as I need them. I've done a similar chart for, I think it was the See You There cardigan, where just for one section of it I was having to be doing multiple different things at different rates. So the stitch patterns were sort of, one might have been four rows, the other one 6, so I just did a table in Excel and printed it off so that I could mark off where I was at, and that works well for me. I have adjusted the buttonhole placement. Now I've got myself in a tangle. I've adjusted the buttonhole placement on this based on one other person's comment in their Ravelry project page. I've just moved it one stitch along, and I sort of had that idea already when I was looking at the photographs of the pattern, because I'm not a fan of buttons feeling like that or looking like they're sort of hanging off the edge of the button band. I prefer a little bit of the button band being visible on the edge of the button. I think that it creates a neater finish on a cardigan. So I've modified that, and only by one stitch, so I think it will give me just enough of a frame to the button. I really like the way that it looks. All my stitches will even out once it's blocked anyway, but it's got a nice bit of stretch. So I also, now that I've got a little bit of the stockinette on the back of the neck, I have done just a quick measure to check that the stitch count is pretty much spot on with the measurement that I got before I blocked my swatch. So it just means that I'm confident that now that I'm actually knitting more stitches, I haven't adjusted my gauge. But it's going well. I'm really happy. I do think that it's going to be a huge amount of stockinette. I don't think I've done a cardigan with 4-ply. No, possibly not. So this is going to be the most amount of back and forth knitting that I've done, because my other stockinette tops have been pullovers that have been done in the round, so that's just knitting and knitting and knitting. So we'll see how we go, but I'll probably have this finished in the new year sometime if things don't get too hectic. And then for some upcoming projects, I am hoping to get this fibre onto my wheel. So this is Heavenly Wool's New Zealand 20 micron merino wool, 100 grams in the Empress of India colourway. I ordered this sometime earlier this year, and I also ordered another one which I spun up for the handbrake cowl. That's it, and that turned out really, really nice and soft. So I've been having a bit of a look at different ways to spin fibre, and I haven't done a true fractal spin before, which is where you tear the fibre down vertically in half. You spin one half as it is, so as a gradient, and then you divide the other half up into sections. So you might do 3 or 4 or 5 sections, or more or less, but you spin those then up, and then you ply the two together as a 2-ply. So I might give that a go and see how it turns out. I think the similarities in colours in this should come up nicely as a fractal spin. but I haven't decided yet if I'll do a long backwards draw or a short forward draw or draft or whatever it's called. I'm not that well versed in my spinning to remember all the names, but for those who have been watching previous episodes, you'll know that I've been practicing the backwards draw or draft, and I think though I'll do this as a short forward because it will mean that I can do a worsted, sort of a more tightly spun or compact yarn. I also haven't had a chance to do any of the dyeing that I've been wanting to do, but hopefully in the next week, if I don't get called away, then I'll do some of that. That's it for this week's episode. I do have a clearance going on in my Etsy shop, which is givemeacrown.etsy.com. So thank you to those who have already bought a couple of items in there. I did make a mention in the Ravelry group about it. I realised that I've got 4 large containers of products, and it would be good to just reduce some of that so that I can fill them up with new stuff in the new year. There are a few more project bags in there still, and then there are some zipper pouches which can be really good for popping gifts into, so whether it's for the holidays or saving them up for future use. I like to give people small gifts within zipper pouches because then they're sort of getting 2 gifts in one. One thing to note if you're outside of Australia is that Etsy calculates the shipping slightly awkwardly sometimes if you're buying multiple items, so it will overestimate, and I'll always refund any extra. But I'm also happy to provide a fixed quote before you buy, and just as a guide, to the US, a 500 gram parcel, which I'll put the ounces in here, is $14.10 Australian, which is around $11 US, and within one of those I've been able to fit 4 or 5 project bags, so that goes across everything that I sell. Etsy might way overquote it if you do pop that many project bags into your cart, just because it's the weight brackets are very hard to judge, so I have to overestimate or put in an accurate amount, but then that accuracy falls away once you get into those heavier parcel weights. So check it out if you're looking for any last minute gifts in Australia. I don't think that they will necessarily reach the rest of the world before the holidays if you order now, but they could be New Year presents. And that's it. Next week, as I mentioned, I'll have a bit of a chat about some of my crafting goals for the past year and also for the next year. There are some things from this year's list that definitely didn't get approached, so if I talk about them on the podcast, then maybe there's other people who want to give some of the techniques a try, and then we can cheer each other on. So thank you very much for watching. It's fantastic that you take a bit of your week to listen to the things that I've been up to, and if you want to come and say hello in the Ravelry group, then please do. There's also just an everyday chatter thread in there at the moment, which you can contribute to or post in the episode thread. And if there's any other threads that you want to start up, then feel free to. And I think I might have some acquisitions next week, so I look forward to sharing those, and I hope that I can put out another episode next week Monday as usual, but that may be up in the air. I just might need to go and help out with this house move again because the actual exchange date is coming up, so I think they're getting a little bit frantic and might need an extra pair of hands. and I'm rambling, so I'll leave it there, and I hope that you're having a lovely week, and I'll see you soon.